Welcome to the Bible Made Clear and our next discipleship class. So this is part 2. We are continuing with actually point number 3, which is that it is true that the theistic God exists. And as we left off last time, we ended up at a place where we were just going to get into the fact that all religions cannot be true, though one can be true. And in starting this out, we're going to walk through Islam. We'll look at a comparison because all religions teach the opposite. Otherwise, they would be the same religion, obviously. So let's contrast Islam and Christianity, and then we'll be able to use this as an example of how even two monotheistic religions, and if you remember from last time, there's only 3 monotheistic major religions in the world. That's Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So let's contrast Islam with Christianity and see where we can bring that. So Islam teaches that God is only one person, a singular person. In Christianity, God is 3 persons in the one God. Now, Islam mistakenly thinks that it's the Father, Jesus, and Mary, but that's not correct. That's because Muhammad was illiterate, and that's what somebody had told him, so that got written into the Quran. They believe that humanity is good by nature. Now, they would have to, because they're going to be judged by their good works to see whether they get into heaven. Christianity teaches that man is sinful by nature. So we see how different these are right off the bat. Jesus is merely a man. As far as Muslims are concerned, he is not God. And in Christianity, he's obviously more than a man. He's God also. Now, he is fully God and fully man, but we don't even come near that in Islam. The death of Christ, Muslims believe that Jesus didn't die, but was brought to heaven, and a look-alike was killed on the cross. So there's obviously no evidence for this. There's not even a modicum, but that's what they believe. And obviously in Christianity, he died and rose again in the same body that he died in. If he had not, he would not have been able to conquer sin and death. So he needed to raise in the same body, which is also why the disciples, the apostles, believed that he rose again, because when they went to the tomb, he was not there. Body was gone. Islam teaches, though there is the Quranic dilemma, which we can talk about, but essentially they believe the Bible is corrupted. They have to, because otherwise they would have to follow Christianity. And obviously we believe the Bible is not corrupted. Now, the Quranic dilemma is that the Quran teaches for people of the book who are Christians to follow the Bible, but then they also teach the Bible is corrupted, so it's a little bit confusing. And the dilemma is, if Islam is true, then it's telling you to follow a different religion. And if Islam is true, then you have a problem, because now God, who supposedly the Quran is from, is now telling you to follow a corrupted Bible. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Salvation in Islam is by faith plus works, when good deeds outweigh the bad ones in the end, unless you die in jihad, which is holy war, and then you go right to their version of heaven. In Christianity, salvation is not by works, but it's a free gift of God by faith to all who believe. So it's always by grace. So if we compare the leaders of Islam and the Bible, we see the differences. So if we look at, and this in particular is according to the Quran, but we need to get the leaders in here, otherwise, we're talking about the followers without talking about the source, which is either Jesus or Muhammad, right? So Muhammad is not virgin born. Jesus is virgin born. Now, again, this is according to the Quran. Muhammad's not sinless, but Jesus is sinless. Muhammad is not the Messiah. Jesus is called the Messiah. Muhammad did no miracles. Jesus did miracles. Muhammad is not called the Word of God, nor did he call himself that. Jesus is called the Word of God. Muhammad's body is in the grave. Jesus' body is in heaven. In the Quran, we have commands to kill. In the Old Testament, we have commands to kill. Commands to kill. So in the Quran, there's a different reason that God has people killed. The motivation is different. The reasoning is different. In the Old Testament, we'll see a contrast. Now, many people try to make both the Quran and the Old Testament similar based on commands to kill from God. However, they are vastly different. There is no real comparison. So we need to understand God who gives life can take it. In a very real sense, and in an actual sense, God cannot murder anybody. In other words, man can murder man, commit homicide, and what we are doing, we're not only killing somebody's body in doing that, but we're also destroying the image of God, because man is created in God's image. God can do that because God is the one that gives life, so God can take life. And in that very real sense, nobody actually dies in relation to God. In other words, people die or become separated from us when their body dies because they're no longer in this life. But they're always in a relation somehow to God, whether it's in this life or when they leave here and go into the next life. Now, whether they go to heaven or go to hell, they still have some aspect of connection with God, in the sense that though a person in hell is separated from God, God is still aware of their existence and is not disconnected from them, in the sense that they still have an active relationship to God, only it's in reference to their eternal punishment. So it's not like God just goes away. In this life, people can be consciously separated from God, which is what a sinner is. When they're spiritually dead, it doesn't mean that they're physically dead. It means they're separated from God in their conscience. Spiritually, their spirit is dead towards God. However, in the afterlife, if a person is in hell, they are very conscious of the fact that they are in hell, and they're also conscious of God. So the idea of like murder and killing and all that stuff, it's much different, obviously, in relation to God than it is in relation of a person to a person. That's why the command is to not murder people that we get in the Old Testament. So in the Quran, innocent people are killed. In other words, God tells Muslims to kill people who are innocent. Commands are only given to kill people in the Old Testament that are guilty. The command to kill is for religious reasons in the Quran, but it is for moral reasons in the Old Testament. It's not for religious reasons. People were not killed just because they weren't Jews. God did not have the Jews kill non-Jews because they were non-Jews. There were always reasons related to morality that really supersedes any religious aspect, because morals, the same morality that is from God, permeates all the different covenants that man would be under. In the Quran, it is a first resort, and in the Old Testament, it's a last resort. In the Quran, the command to kill is exercised on unbelievers, and in the Old Testament, it's only on some unbelievers. Some believers, again, because of moral reasons, the command was to kill them. There was capital punishment, and actually that was very much focused inside of Israel. If you blasphemed, that brought the death penalty. The death penalty was for a number of reasons, not just for murder, working on the Sabbath day, dishonoring the Sabbath in that way brought the death penalty. Worshipping idols, getting other people to worship idols, being a false prophet. There was a number of things, rape, adultery. Those were capital punishment offenses. Now, those had nothing to do with, that is not a religious reason. That is a moral reason. And those are moral reasons on people that are under the Mosaic covenant. So they were considered, though they weren't necessarily all people of faith, they were genealogically connected to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so they were Jews. That's why it says on some unbelievers, right? The Quran had the commands to kill at any time. When God gave a command to kill in the Old Testament, it was for a specific time. There wasn't just this blatant command that kind of permeated all time. And in the Quran, the command to kill was never for redeeming anybody. It was not in reference to anybody's redemption, but it was in reference to working towards the redemption of people in the Old Testament. In the Quran, it was simply an act of man. God kind of, in the Quran, just tells people that they can decide kind of when to kill somebody, and here's the principle, and then you just go act on it. But it was an act of God in the Old Testament, and it was only as directed by God. Now, in the Quran, it was not confirmed by God, because there's many times that Muslims killed other people, had no kind of connection to God necessarily, and then it's always confirmed by God in the Old Testament. God is very much involved with everything that was being done. So if we compare the religious wars, where we're on this kind of discussion about violent occurrences, whether in the Quran or in the Bible, we now move to jihad, which is holy war. And then obviously a couple of hundred years after Christ, we have crusades that started, and the impetus for the crusades, many people really don't understand. The crusades were in a response to the invasion of Islam throughout the Middle East, and off into some kind of European areas and even the Far East. So the Crusades were they were not an active directive to just go and do them for the sake of doing them. They were really a responsive action because of what the movement of Islam was causing historically. The movement of Islam from city to city across the Middle East was to convert villages, and as they would come upon a village, then people were required to either convert to Islam or die. Sometimes they would allow subjects to be taken that were not converted and use them as slaves. But other than that, they were, Genghis Khan, I mean, you can read his history. a lot of these Islamic leaders used to basically go into a town, kill everybody, pile the heads up outside, and that was to bring others in fear of not submitting to Islam when they would come through there. But that's how they grew. Now, the Crusades are not defensible biblically because they are not something that the Bible teaches. But they are just like I said, they were a response that were done in reference to the violence of Islam. So jihad, or holy war, is consistent with the teachings of the Quran. Surah 9:5, that's chapter 9, verse 5. They call them surahs. That's where it's taught. The Crusades were actually contrary to the New Testament. Jesus never taught anybody to go out and conquer anybody through violence. So you can see that in Matthew 26:52. So, look, it's pretty obvious that you cannot find a reason for the Crusades in the New Testament. That doesn't mean that people are not going to do them. And again, it's not defensible from the standpoint of the New Testament, or in a sense, from a Christian standpoint. The Crusades were really more functioning as a really kind of a governmental response through the involvement of the Church of Rome to try to prevent more jihad, really. It's consistent with the example of Muhammad, the jihads, the holy wars, because that's what he did. And it's contrary to the example of Christ. Jesus did not have any crusades, nor did he tell anybody to. Jihad is the logical outworking of Islam because of how it functions and how it's taught and how it's supposed to operate in the Quran. It is an illogical outworking of Christianity. We don't make converts in Christianity by threatening their life. And Islam grew by the use of the sword and other means of violence, and Christianity grew by use of the sword on it. So as Islam used violence on others to cause growth, Christianity had violence used on it, and that persecution, and that actually caused the growth. Now, the question arises in the Old Testament, is Jehovah Allah? And some think that they are. This is called Chrislam, where people try to blend Christianity and Islam together, which is obviously a big mistake. However, because some Christians just do not understand the Old Testament well, they have looked at a very surface view of, like what we just went through. They don't know, so they'll look at a surface view, superficial view of violence in the Old Testament. Well, God told them to kill, and Allah tells them to kill. Well, they must be the same God. This couldn't be further from the truth. We've already seen some of that, but as we look, we need to realize they cannot be the same God, okay? Because, again, it would violate the law of non-contradiction. They're different. They're different in many, many ways, and we'll see a few of them here. In Islam, God is a singular being. He was alone, actually had his first relationship after he created man. In Christianity, God is a Trinity. There are three persons in the one God, and through Christianity, God actually brings man that is redeemed into the fellowship of the Trinity, that perfect unity in the relation between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in the Godhead. So the very nature of God is different in Islam and Christianity. Like I said, it would be the first relationship and the first experience of a relationship that Allah would have when he created man. And the relationship in the Trinity is eternal, and this is something that is shared with man, and man is kind of brought into this sharing as opposed to kind of having the first relationship when God created man. In Islam, God is a non-sacrificial God. There's no grace that is offered. Love is not primary. In other words, these are all contrary to Allah, where in Christianity, God is a sacrificial God. He sends his Son, saves by grace. He is the source of love. We do not find these same things within the Quran and Islam. Salvation is based on works in Islam, as we've seen, is based on faith in Christianity. So they're not just different, they're incompatible. The God of Islam and the God of Christianity they have no compatibility whatsoever. So to try to blend them together in this kind of Chrislam idea is a big mistake, and I think has caused a lot of confusion. Even on the mission field, it was a number of years ago that there was a problem even with the Wycliffe Bible translators that because they wanted, you had one group that wanted to accommodate this concept of Chrislam, and so they're taking the idea of what the Muslims believed about God. Now, Muslims will not call God their father. They will not say that Jesus is the Son of God and all that, and they have a different name for Jesus. And some of the Wycliffe Bible translators, to try to help in missionary endeavors, were actually changing the translation and removing Jesus being called the Son of God, God being called the Father, and also replacing the Islamic name for Jesus with Jesus. So this caused a split. Today, you still have Farsi Bibles that are translated good, and then you have Chrislam Farsi Bibles that are translated differently. And I don't think it's helped the missionary effort, because you're basically telling Muslims, in attempts to bring them to the truth, you're allowing them to believe lies, and that just doesn't work. So, look, all views of God can't be true. We see with even with Islam, that's a monotheistic religion, you have no compatibility between Islam and Christianity. So to claim all views are true, which is pluralism, is obviously self-contradictory. It would violate the law of non-contradiction. It would violate the correspondence with the facts, because either reality corresponds with what is actual or what is factual. This would contradict that. It would deny the absolute nature of truth, because, again, if pluralism was true, that would mean that Islam and Christianity were true. How could they be true? They have different gods. They have different ways of salvation. They have different instruction books, and that's only two religions. You get into all the multiple religions of the world, you realize that they're all incompatible. And though some may have some similarities, you have some religions that believe in reincarnation and karma and all that, but that doesn't mean everything else that they believe is true. So pluralism is self-contradictory. You cannot have all religions be true, because they conflict, right? Now, to do this, right, to try to make them all align with each other, you'd have to use the law of non-contradiction to try, but you would violate it, right? The law of non-contradiction. You can't use it to try to disprove it, right? If you tried to disprove the law of non-contradiction, you have to use the law of non-contradiction to try to deny it. So you'd be affirming it. However, as it says, to do this, you would have to what? You would have to use the law of non-contradiction to try and violate the law. Correspondence, you'd have to use correspondence with the facts to try to deny it. In other words, try to deny that pluralism is false. You'd have to use the absolute truth to claim a relative truth, that things are relative. The illustration is not all Scott Mitchells are the same person, right? There are other people named Scott Mitchell. Believing they are, in other words, if somebody said, well, I think they're all the same person, well, that doesn't alter the facts. It doesn't make us all the same. We're different people, live in different areas of the world and everything else. Claiming they are doesn't correspond to the facts. So it doesn't really matter what people say is true, what they would like to believe is true. Things that are true, they are either true or they're not true. Really, it's just one or the other. So all views of God, they can't be true, right? Can all religions be true? No. They teach opposites, and opposites can't be true. Can one religion be true? Yes. If we use the law of non-contradiction to discover what view corresponds to reality. Now, that's what we did with God, right? So we saw that the theistic God, by use of the law of non-contradiction and the absolute truth, corresponds to what is real. Do other religions have some truth? Yes. But since the opposite of true is false, if one religion is true, and if we assume at this point for discussion that Christianity is true, then all opposing claims or beliefs in other religions are false. Now, that would be the same if Islam was true, that all opposing claims or beliefs in other religions, they would be false. I mean, this is pretty straightforward. Now, there are three arguments for a theistic God. There is the cosmological argument, cosmological coming from the term order, cosmos. And the argument is very simple. The universe had a beginning, so it had to have a beginner. There's the teleological argument, or what we call the design argument, right? And the argument is that life reveals incredible design. There has to be a designer. And then the moral argument, right? People have a sense of morality, and there is a moral law. There has to be a moral lawgiver. You don't get laws from nothing, right? People have to make laws. So here's the logic for the three arguments. Cosmological argument, the universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Everything with a beginning had a beginner. Now, obviously, God is the original uncaused cause. He's eternal, so he did not have a beginning. But everything with a beginning had to have a beginner. Somebody had to cause it, right? The teleological argument, every design has a designer, right? Teleos means the end. In other words, things are designed with things are created with some end goal. That's why they're designed in a particular way. Life had a design, therefore life has a designer. Very, very simple. The moral argument works the same way. Every law has a lawgiver, right? There is a moral law, therefore there is a moral lawgiver. Now, obviously, we don't have laws that we abide by even in our communities. They came from nowhere. Somebody had to make the laws. The laws are a logical outworking of something else, but they have to come from somebody's mind. And that's what we see in life, and that the Bible teaches, that God is the creator of the moral law, and that's why we all have that sense. So it doesn't matter what religion you're in, what part of the world you're in, whether you're a criminal or non-criminal, everybody has the basic sense of right and wrong. Now, yes, it needs to be refined by understanding more of the truth. Special revelation in the Bible gives us that, but the basic view or the basic understanding of right and wrong, we all have that, and we're all in agreement. Now, here's the logic for argument number one. Cosmological argument, easy for me to say, the universe had a beginning. Therefore, the beginner couldn't be part of it. That would be pantheism. So this is contrary. the cosmological argument is contrary to pantheism. There has to be a beginner. The universe didn't make itself, so that's contrary to atheism, right? If there's no God, it can't make himself either way. And it's obviously contrary to polytheism, multiple gods. Finite gods can't answer the beginner question because they all have limitations. And the beginner has to be infinite and the ultimate of perfection. So if there were a whole bunch of finite gods, then they would have had to have been created by some other being because they lack something. They're finite. And they would have had to have a beginning. They are not infinite. They are not eternal in that sense. So this is the cosmological argument argues against pantheism, atheism, and obviously polytheism.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
I like those little videos that William Lane Craig puts out. I think they're just really helpful, get to the point, and are simple. So the universe had a beginning. Now, first there's the philosophical evidence. When we talk about philosophy, think about reasoning. A lot of times philosophy gets a bad name because philosophers typically have their heads in the clouds and are talking theoretically and everything else. But, there's bad philosophy and there's good philosophy. But philosophical thinking is essential because it's thinking based on the reasoning ability that God created in us. So if we think in that way, and we try to reason through a natural understanding of the evidence that's there, we realize that time is not eternal. Time is inseparable from matter. So time is a philosophical argument that the universe is not eternal, right? Then we have physical evidence. The universe is not eternal. That would be scientific. In other words, space is a physical property. It exists, and the second law of thermodynamics, as mentioned in the little video, acts on matter, and so everything is following. We're losing energy, heat through heat, and things fall to a more disordered state. The easiest example of the second law of thermodynamics is rust. And, you leave your tools or a bike or something like that outside in the rain, and then eventually it will rust. So if you think about in this slide here, philosophically, this is philosophical evidence, right? We have a timeline. So here we are in the present. The timeline goes to the past. We haven't hit the future yet. And yesterday is measurable to today. In other words, yesterday happened and now we're in the present. But there was yesterday, then there was the day before yesterday, and we can measure those because of time. You can't have an infinite number of days prior to today. It wouldn't work. And then you have last week. So we're going to see a little video here where Frank Turk is going to go through this and give you a little bit of a better presentation that I'm doing here. But if the past were infinite, today would never have arrived. You couldn't have last week, yesterday, the day before yesterday, and then today. It would not be measurable in that way. So,
do you think that the Andromeda Galaxy is another universe?
No.
Well, about 150 years ago, it was called another island universe.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talk about things like the Big Bang, and maybe things that might be before it or a cause of, then the whole question of what the universe means arises, and your presentation doesn't deal with that well. And there are physicists who give serious idea to the thought of these multiverses, as well as there's this marvelous thing called colliding membranes. And your presentation does not serve your listeners well to not acknowledge them. So if you want questions, are you familiar with the membrane idea that the membranes collide? This causes this repeating universe, which you don't like. You're going to say entropy is violated and so on, like you did in Knoxville. Are you familiar with the membrane colliding theory?
Yeah, hang on one second. I'm looking for something here. Hold on. Stand by for vectors, Victor. There's all sorts of different theories out here, as you know, Forrest.
And we should say hypothesis because
right, yeah.
Hypotheses are things that don't have evidence behind them yet.
Okay.
In fact,
yeah,
we're struggling to find ways to test them.
You can say anything you want, but there's a difference between a possibility and evidence for a possibility. Right? You can say that we were all created by green leprechauns, but that doesn't mean that that's a theory that has evidence behind it. What has happened over the past 50 or so years has been that the standard Big Bang cosmology has taken all sorts of attacks from all sorts of different directions, oscillating universes, membranes, all this kind of thing, and it has come through as still the standard model for good reason.
Do you understand that the Big Bang Theory merely says that the universe went through a hot, dense phase about 13.8 billion years ago? It does not say that there was a creation event before that. That's one of the possibilities.
There's a lot of possibilities, but
a lot of
even
hypotheses.
I could go through quote after quote here from
I think we served my purpose. Your first bullet in that slide it said creation, teleology. I'm going to mangle that word. Help me with that word, teleology. There we go.
Teleological,
and moral. That first bullet, we've now demonstrated you've made a strong claim than you want. You've made a claim stronger than you want. I'm ready to surrender.
Okay, let me just, before you go, Forrest, I just want to point something out. Let's say, I don't grant this, but let's just say that somehow there's a new cosmological theory that comes along that supplants the Big Bang, right? Because science, as you pointed out...
It doesn't supplant it. It will enlarge it, and the Big Bang will be a special case of, or
all right.
Let
me make my point, okay? Let's just say that cosmology is tentative, because science is tentative. This is not tentative here, what I'm about to show you. That shows that time had a beginning. This is a philosophical argument for the beginning of time. Here's today. There's yesterday. There's the day before yesterday. There's last week. Question: can this line be infinite into the past?
Yes.
How could it be infinite into the past and today have arrived?
It can be infinite if there is no beginning. What we do see is that we now live
Please answer the question. How could today have gotten here if there's an infinite number of days before today?
I believe that we are struggling against inadequacy of the English language, which lets us construct nonsensical questions.
How is it a nonsensical question to say that there can't be an infinite number of days before today for today to have arrived?
I think maybe I can try and address that by saying, can you hand me a piece of this nothing that was before, and we can talk about its properties?
You're sounding like Lawrence Krauss now. No, nothing is non-being. Non-being, nothing.
Do you have a piece of it that we can examine its properties?
No, because nothing is not a piece of anything.
So you're making philosophical assumptions yourself.
Forrest, yeah. Okay, you don't have an answer, I understand.
My answer was that we don't have evidence of a beginning. That was my answer.
This is evidence of a beginning right here, because for a couple reasons. You can't traverse an infinite number of days to get to today. Secondly, you can't be at the end of an infinite, right? Because an infinite is something that has no end. But here we are at the end of the infinite. Thirdly, you can't add anything to an infinite. But tomorrow we're going to add another day, and the day after that we'll add another day, and the day after that we'll add another day. So there can't be an infinite number of moments before today. By the way, this argument was brought forth by a Muslim philosopher about 800 years ago and has since yet to be answered.
So Forrest is obviously a bit confused, but it's interesting because I like these little videos. They show you the interaction and the absurdity. People really struggle to try to make a case against something that is clear and logically sound. So that's why I like it anyway. So now the universe had a beginning, right? So it must have had a beginner, as we've been talking. The evidence leaves us with the following two options. Now this is the evidence because the universe did have a beginning. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheist view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theist view. It has to be either or. It can't be both. You'd be violating the law of non-contradiction. You can't have two things that are opposite and true at the same time in the same sense. So because it can't be both, the question is, which view is more reasonable? Well, obviously, somebody making something is more reasonable than something being made by no one, okay? I think that's pretty clear. But Lawrence Krauss would disagree with that. He's a theoretical physicist, and he wrote this book a number of years ago called A Universe from Nothing. Now, his nothing is really something, but He's a professor at Arizona University, and this book was number 11 on the New York Times bestseller list for a bit, and people were reading this and thinking it's viable logic because of who he is, not what he presents. We have a problem in our culture where people believe the presentation because of how it's presented as opposed to what is presented. So
and there's a whole galaxy, it's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You'd think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with a brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And they're remarkable, and I keep having asides. Maybe I'll get to my point eventually. But this is something that I wrote a whole book about, and someone asked me yesterday why I wrote that book. Because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe. Richard wrote a great book called, what's it called? Our Ancestors? What's it called? Ancestor's Tale, yes. I wanted to make sure I got that right. And I wrote a book that was a different Ancestor's Tale. It was called Adam. But the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
Lawrence thinks he's pretty slick there. So, but we have I have another clip here, and again, this is to help you see where these people are coming from and to make the points.
Between us there. And some other reality.
No, there's nothing. Well, there's absolutely nothing there until there's something.
What's the second type of nothing?
Okay, well then if you don't buy that, then I can say, well, you might say, well, that's not nothing because there's space.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then in fact space itself becomes dynamical, and universes, spaces themselves and time can pop into existence where there was none before.
So in some theoretical end space, before the moment of creation, there can be no time and no space and no energy?
And no energy. Zero
and then
energy.
Suddenly, from nowhere and from nothing comes something and somewhere.
And all sorts of stuff, and it sounds like the ultimate free lunch, and
yes,
it is.
It is.
It is, and it really, and what's remarkable is it's possible without any supernatural shenanigans. And
but listen, stop with that.
Why?
Why is what you're doing, whatever this is? Because obviously, because I am not in the priesthood, I can't understand the scrawls on the blackboards you people down at where are you?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, so you could.
Where are you? You're Arizona State.
Arizona State.
Okay, you priests of theoretical physics, you can explain to each other what you mean with your language of math, and I have to take that on faith.
No, in fact, you should be skeptical.
I am.
And in fact, you should. I know. And that's why you should. That's why I tried to provide the arguments in the book.
But I will never read it. So why other people should? You should buy it.
Buying it is important.
Buying is good.
Yeah.
Okay. But why does what you're saying have to be an attack on my God?
It doesn't have to be an attack.
But that's all you've done. You've attacked my God for the last 6 minutes.
No. You have. All I've said is you don't need him.
That's an attack.
No.
Of course we are here to love God,
the universe,
serve God.
as we understand it, we've changed our minds about the universe. We've learned that the universe is more remarkable than anything we ever thought before. And in fact, changing your mind and in fact being wrong is wonderful. You should try it sometime. It's really amazing. It means that the fact that the universe is more remarkable than the fairy tales that were talked about by Bronze Age literate peasants before we knew the Earth orbited the sun.
You're not attacking at all, but go ahead.
No, but I mean,
but Leslie, so you say, so you believe there's no God?
I don't even use the word believe. The point is there is
no God.
There's no need for God.
Is there God? Is there God?
It's
what would you say?
There's no evidence for God.
Okay.
There's no evidence for God.
So let me ask something. If there is no God, okay, if there is no thing called God, if he is nothing, can't something come from him?
So, Lawrence Krauss, in the book A Universe from Nothing, basically said that everything comes from this quantum vacuum. But that's something. You know, the best definition of nothing is what Aristotle said. Aristotle said, nothing is what rocks dream about. It is no thing. It's like zero, nothing. No space, no time, no matter, nothing. No quantum energy, no quantum vacuum. And so for Krauss, his nothing is something that had to have been created, had to have a beginning, and then it just starts popping stuff into existence. So, it's unfortunate, but he does come across in a way that is a bit distasteful, especially for a Christian. But be that as it may, the point, I think you get the point. So now, the physical evidence, we looked at the philosophical evidence. Physical evidence is the second law of thermodynamics, right? The universe is running down. It's running out of energy, right? Usable energy. So, and that's why it's so difficult. We get to, how old is the universe or whatever. You look just from a scientific standpoint, aside from the Bible, and there are all kinds of assumptions that have to be made. I mean, if you walked into a room and you saw an hourglass and it was half empty, half of the sand was on the bottom, and I said, how long has the hourglass been dropping sand? You would have to assume, you don't have to, I guess you would assume, you'd say if it's an hourglass and half the sand's on the bottom, it'd have been dropping it for 30 minutes. Well, there might have been a lot of sand on the bottom, might have started a second ago. So you have to make certain assumptions when you're dealing with time from a scientific standpoint, but that's a little bit of another subject. Secular scientists agree on a beginning, okay? Now, they hold to the Big Bang as a viable scientific beginning, as Frank Turek was saying that, in science today, the Big Bang model is, for the most part, what they use scientifically. And, it certainly has problems, but it has a beginning, and that's the key, right? But not everybody obviously believes in it. The issue for us as Christians when we're dealing with the beginning of the universe, because everybody has different views, Christians have different views when it comes to, what they believe the Bible teaches about the beginning of the universe. But the issue in discussing the universe at this point is not how it began, but that it began. We are not teaching creationism when we're trying to help a person understand that there are philosophical and scientific reasons that support the existence of God. He is necessary to be there for the universe to be there. So it's not jumping into the Bible and reading them the beginning of Genesis. We first of all have to establish the fact that God exists before we get to the Bible. And look, if somebody believes the Bible already, then, our apologetics is done. Now we have to get to the Bible and then demonstrate from the Bible that, Jesus is the Savior of the world, and that faith in him will provide you everlasting life. So that's a different conversation. That's preaching the gospel to them, by grace through faith. But at this point, we're talking about trying to convince somebody that God exists, and we're just trying to present evidence that the universe had a beginning, so we can have now the presentation of the evidence for God, as opposed to how he did it. The how is not really the begging question here. It is that he created the universe. So this is apologetics, not Christian creation science. We've got to remember that. And so let's consider the Big Bang just for a moment. All right, what it is. Is the Big Bang biblical? Well, first let's understand where it come from, the terminology. It was from Fred Hoyle. He was a British mathematician and astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, and he did it actually as a mockery of the concept. He rejected the concept and also rejected Darwinian evolution. He was not a Christian or a biblical creationist, but through evidence believed that the fine-tuning of the universe required a designer. This is what he said: a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion beyond question. So the term Big Bang stuck. It certainly is, and this is where it comes from.
In the beginning, there was nothing. A vacuum, void, empty space. And in this empty space there emerged a primordial fireball. Billions of years ago, this fireball exploded. This explosion generated all space, energy, matter. The universe expanded rapidly, producing electrons, neutrinos, photons, and quarks. Soon, this energy began interacting, forming protons and neutrons. Matter continued colliding and interacting. Over time, the first simple elements formed. These elements also collided as the primordial soup continued to expand. Cosmic and particulate evolution continued, and stars began to group, forming into the earliest galaxies. And then, just 5 billion years ago, something wondrous occurred. Within a cloud of gas in a spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy, our sun formed. This new star gave birth to planets, moons, and asteroids. One of these planets, known as Earth, developed an atmosphere. Earth's environment, believed to be filled with volcanic eruptions, lightning, turbulent weather, mixed atoms and energy to create the first simple living cells. Then, through millions of years of mutations and natural selection, algae, jellyfish, and flatworms appeared. As evolution continued, fish appeared in the seas on planet Earth. Some of these fish developed into amphibians, and through natural selection changed into reptiles. A segment of these reptiles evolved into a variety of creatures, including mammals. Some of these mammals became primates, and then, just 600,000 years ago, an isolated group of these primates evolved into man's earliest ancestors. This is our amazing evolutionary heritage. And evolution continues today as we evolve to our even higher destiny in the universe.
So that is supposedly what happens when the universe explodes and just comes into being, and then eventually through all the star formulation, which actually you need at least one star to have other stars, but that's a different issue. Not going to delve into that at this point, but the evolution of man developed from basically, the explosion that created the universe. Now, I don't believe that that's true, obviously, and we're not going to present that here, but I just want you to understand what the theory of the Big Bang, and from a secular evolutionist perspective, what they believe. I apologize for the volume being low on that. It was just, it's low. So, now, there are those of us that believe in a young Earth. The young Earth view is based on the following reasons. Now, obviously, if you believe in the Big Bang, you get a 14.6 billion year universe that you're believing in. And then if you believe in a young Earth, you're really basing that on the Bible and on science from that perspective. So a young Earth is based on this, that man was made on day 6 relative to the beginning, and that they were literal days. The days of Genesis, 24-hour days. If you compare it with Genesis 20:11, Moses said that's the first time the 10 Commandments is given. And Moses said in the 4th commandment, as God created the earth in 6 days and rested on the 7th, so man works 6 days and rests on the 7th. Now, the natural correlation there is obviously they're 24-hour days. And to try to change that, you have to have a reason to change it. I don't think there is one, but Jesus said in Mark 10:6, from the beginning of the creation, and there's the Strong's number for that word creation, God made them male and female. So male and female were made at the beginning of the creation. They weren't made, billions of years after it. Genealogies in the Bible limit the time frame of Adam. Jude tells us that Enoch was the 7th generation from Adam. I don't care how many years you want to make a generation. You're not going to get millions, tens of millions, and hundreds of millions of years. It just doesn't work like that. You're limited. People talk about, there's some gaps in genealogies. Well, it's not millions of years of gaps in genealogies. These are fallacious arguments. They're things that are put out there because they answer a concern that people may have. But, I mean, again, we need to deal with facts. The fossil record is really the results of the flood. It's not a time scale. Which again is a whole different issue. I'm going to actually have an interview with Herb Butterworth. We're going to talk about that subject. But I've had this conversation with old Earth people, and that's fine. Look, there's some Christians that believe in an old universe, and some believe, like myself, in a young Earth. And I don't. There's no scientific reason to conclude that somehow the fossil layers are related to millions of years instead of the flood. I think the flood is far better evidence and a more scientific and reasonable conclusion. To try to say that things just kind of waited there for millions of years for the dirt to pile up on top of it. There are so many assumptions and pieces that are put into that to make it work that are not scientific. They're just basically a whole list of assumptions that it doesn't really fit. Adam's sin brought death to all creation. Now again, it's the same word for creation that you have in Mark 10:6. Now I have heard people try to say that, well, Adam's sin caused death, but it had no relation to the death of animals, which quite frankly is absurd. In Romans 8, it tells us that all creation groans and travails, and it is related to man's sin, and it goes away at man's redemption. If it is something that was just supposed to be there, then man's redemption should not affect it in any way, but yet it does, because the whole creation groans and travails until the manifestations of the sons of God, right? Until we finally get our glorified bodies, and we're ultimately talking about the millennial reign into eternity. The millennial reign ends a lot of this same effect. Though sin will still exist in death, it removes a lot of the effect, and then ultimately that is gone. Now, Paul uses the same word to describe creation, the original creation of the world, where he talks about in Romans 1:20, he says, since the creation, same word as in Mark 10:6 and Romans 8, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen. Well, they can only be clearly seen if somebody's there. How they are seen, if no one is there to see them from the original creation, is beyond me. But man is the viewer of this in Paul's context, in the context that Paul is writing, and Paul is bringing that back to the original creation, the beginning of everything. So it's difficult to get by this. Look, I'll bottom line it by saying this, and then we have to really move on to the other aspects, because we're at an hour at this point. I want to end, but I'll bottom line it by saying this: the time problem is the same for old Earth as young Earth people, and that is how time is measured in space. And there are a lot of assumptions that are made, but the bottom line is that there is, from what we understand, a relative time difference the further you get away from the Earth in relation to us, and that is what can account for the apparent large amount of time that is assumed with the expansion of the universe. Now, again, we have to assume many, many things, and the Big Bang model, if you've ever seen a picture of it, has inflation, because that doesn't work either, because you have the equal heat distribution throughout the whole universe, which is not possible. There's not enough time, actually, for that to happen. So they have to have a rapid expansion at the beginning. Again, another assumption. So we have a time issue in the universe that's beyond what we are dealing with here on Earth. But that's a problem for everybody. And if I'm going to fall to one side or the other, I'm going to fall to the side of the Bible, because the other evidence on Earth that we can understand and measure is supported by young Earth and everything else. So now, the old Earth view is based on following reasons, right? The Bible does not teach a specific time when it refers to the beginning that is provided by scientific discovery. In other words, science provides it. The Bible doesn't really provide it. Now, the Bible doesn't give you a date, but some of the verses I just gave you obviously gives you a time reference. Genesis 1:2 is not connected to any days or times. That is the assumption. The days are more than 24-hour days, so again, a reason to stretch time. Genesis chapter 1 and 2 are not strict literal history. They're changed into some other aspect, some different genre, without reason, though. not within the Bible. You can make comparisons with other genres outside of the Bible, and try to come to a different conclusion, but that doesn't really work within the Bible grammatically or historically. Genealogies have gaps in them, but those gaps are very, very limited when we're talking these major time differences. Death occurred before man was created. That's an assumption with an old Earth, and the fossil record is used as a time scale, which again I think has a number of problems. So those are at least the contrast between the two views. And here's Frank
I saw
Turek.
your video of you telling somebody
We'll end with
about
this
the
one.
whole young Earth, old Earth
Yeah.
theory. Do you believe that the dinosaurs to be millions of years old based on carbon dating, like scientists do?
Like age of the Earth question, look, I'm absolutely certain the universe is at least 57 years old. All right, I'm going to throw my dad in there. It's at least 83. Okay? Christians argue over this, and I could spend a lot of time going through it, but let me give you the very short answer. No matter what perspective you take on the age of the Earth, you're making assumptions that you can't prove. Whether you think it's old or young, you're making assumptions you can't prove. Let me give you an example. Some people will say, well, the light from the stars shows that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. That assumes the speed of light hasn't changed, right? If the speed of light has changed, we don't know how old the universe is. Is it a good assumption the speed of light hasn't changed? Probably. Why? Because if you change the speed of light, you've got to change all the other laws of physics with it, right? So it's probably the fact that the Earth is very old, okay? Carbon dating also has assumptions you can't prove. The beginning amount of carbon-14 in something, the decay rate, all that has changed. Same thing with salt in the ocean. These are all assumptions you can't prove. Are they good assumptions? They might be. Right? How about saying that the Bible teaches a young universe? It might. However, if you want to take a hyper-literal view of Genesis 1, what does the first verse say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, when did God create the heavens and the earth? In the beginning. Does it say when the beginning was? No. You say, well, the days. What about the days? The days don't begin till verse 3. Right? But Genesis 1:1 says the heavens and the earth are already created. You say, well, maybe that's a summary statement. It could be, but what are you doing? You're making an assumption you can't prove. It seems to me, and this is the case with John Lennox, the great Christian philosopher and mathematician from Oxford University, who wrote the book 7 Days That Divide the World. He thinks Genesis 1:1 leaves the question of the age of the earth indeterminate. Because if the heavens and the earth are created before the first day begins, who knows how old the universe is? Either way, you've got assumptions you can't prove. That God created is more certain than when. One other thing I got to say about this, because I know a lot of people are thinking, what about death before the fall, right? And we think that Romans 5:12 says that death came to creation because of Adam's sin. That's not what it says. It says death came to all men through Adam's sin. It doesn't say that death came to all creation. There could have been death before Adam and Eve to creation. Remember, there was a fall before the fall. What was the fall before the fall? Satan, right? That could have affected the earth. We don't know. And by the way, why would you need to build a Garden of Eden if the whole world was a paradise? These are just things you got to think about, right? That God created is more certain than when. So it's an important question, an interesting question, but it's not a question for orthodoxy. It's not, you've got to believe young or old. You could believe either way. I guarantee you this, when you get to heaven, God isn't going to say, did you think I was old or young? Do not make this a test for orthodoxy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Now, I would agree with Frank in the fact that we should not make it a test for orthodoxy. Some people have tried to do that. I think that the age of the earth, whether you believe in old or young, Frank believes in old, I believe in young. We're different. It's not going to, at least from my position, it's not going to affect our fellowship or anything else. It will certainly affect our view in Genesis and some of our approach to Scripture with certain assumptions. I understand that. However, my salvation and his salvation is not resting on our view of when the universe was created. Okay? And that is important because some people are trying to make it that. Salvation is not based on your view of creation. What your view of creation is going to affect is your consistency in understanding the rest of the Bible. And if you deliteralize certain aspects or start to deconstruct Genesis, it affects your view on other doctrines and perspectives as you go through the Bible, and you can become inconsistent. This is one of the largest problems with Bible interpretation. Maybe I should do a video on it at some point, is the inconsistency in the approach to understanding things that are historical pieces as well as prophetic scriptures, because people tend to just leave literal behind, and drive away from them. But it causes all kinds of problems. But anyways, we're a little bit over an hour. I apologize for the length. I just wanted to get at least get us up to this point. But something to think about. So until next time, we'll put part 3 in next time. And may God richly bless you as you continue to study his word.